When you imagine a lodge set beside a glassy lake in the pristine southwest corner of Ontario, you don't picture Duxie's docks. True, the landscape is a glorious carpet of evergreen and birch, generously dotted by crystalline waters with rocky shorelines. But Duxie's is the human scab on nature's perfection. It slouches along the edge of a swiftly moving creek that merges into Rainy River, which for 250 kilometers constitutes the Canada-US border, not as a linear demarcation, but a meandering series of remote lakes with an invisible boundary somewhere out there in the middle. In the late 1960s, someone told Brian Duck, when he inherited the ramshackle resort from his suddenly dead father, to paint the whole place yellow and make it stand out against its forested surroundings. Good for business. So he did. 50 years later, the same paint is chipping and fading, and Duxie's dreamy lodge is a random pile of shacks and house trailers routinely avoided by even the most rustic tourists. So, anticipating yet another slow weekend ahead, the sound of a vehicle crunching on his gravel parking lot in the late morning startles Duxie to the point that he quickly hides the bottle of Jim Beam he's been working on since sunrise and steps to the screen door to investigate. It's a late model Jeep Cherokee with two very large men slamming the doors and heading his way. Looks to Duxie like a couple of goddamn make-believe fur trappers, all decked out like fucking peacocks in new gear purchased, no doubt, from some high-design outfitter in Toronto or Winnipeg. Turns out these two are more foreign than Duxie expects, barely speaking English. Still, despite their poor language skills and his own wooziness, it's plain what they want. When the slightly less massive one, the one with the beard, shows a stack of crisp American bills, maybe 5 centimeters thick, Duxie's eyes refocus and his duty becomes clear. These gentlemen want a quiet one-way canoe trip to Minnesota. Duxie figures they've come to the right place. Slipping undetected into the U.S. isn't all that hard from the Quetico. Duxie's place, lying just outside the western boundary of the Quetico Provincial Park, which, when combined with Boundary Waters canoe area on the U.S. side, forms a vast wilderness paradise where no motorized travel is allowed. Backpackers and canoeists spend days, sometimes weeks, in the woods and on the water without seeing another human. Duxie is normally a curious sort, but not today. He's taking at face value the explanation that these guys, they don't offer their names, are tourists from Finland looking for, as the bearded one explains, some nature adventures. The man shows a map of where they want to go. Duxie asks when. The man says, "How about now?" Duxie is pretty soon down at the dock tinkering with the big canoe, the 20-footer, the one rigged with 3 seats, 3 life jackets, various lights, fishing gear, bug spray, dried food packets, pop tents, bedrolls, water and a cooler with beer and an extra bottle of gin. He hasn't bothered to spruce himself up, still wearing the 3-day beard, the haggard look of a skinny, rapidly aging man whose luck has run out. But his eyes dance at the thought of the cash that he has just stashed away in the floorboards beneath his cot up at the cabin. 2 hours later, they're on the water. Duxie has placed the biggest guy in front, instructing him briefly in the art of paddling. The middle guy takes charge of the cooler and the 2 identical backpacks, black, unmarked, streamlined jobs that Duxie has never seen before. He is, of course, in the back, acting as rudder and tour guide. They're moving along quite nicely, thanks to the up-front paddler who, while an obvious novice, has an impressive stroke due largely to brute strength. Must be a bodybuilder, Duxie assumes, never before experiencing the feel of a canoe hurtling with such power over the top of the waves. They're westbound on the Namakan River now, just beyond Lady Rapids. At this rate, the trip will take less than 5 hours. Duxie's plan has him dropping off his guests in Minnesota sometime before dark, with him continuing alone to the Burnt Island campground, arriving about sunset. For now, he feels obligated to point out to his companions some of the sights along the way. A pair of loons draw his attention. "Do you have loons in Finland?" he wonders. No response. Undeterred, Duxie holds forth on the fish species available in these waters, describing in detail the much-admired walleye. He has his own recipe for deep-fried fillets in beer batter. His passengers seem uninterested. An hour goes by. No other signs of human habitation appear. The sun is getting lower. A hawk circles overhead. Aside from Duxie's narrative, the only sound comes from paddles hitting water. Duxie moves on to geology and history, telling about how the glacial ice retreated 12,000 years ago, leaving these astonishing rocks and lakes, 600 of them in the Quetico alone, and how the Ojibwe and the French trappers once roamed these waters and woods, and how the Canadian and US governments came in with all these bullshit rules and regulations, but with Mickey Mouse enforcement that almost never happens. Might see a chopper up high twice a week, he says. US fucking Border Patrol. Might see a Canuck inspector's boat checking for permits and papers once a month. But that's about the extent of it. Again, no response from his tourists, who, despite the spectacular beauty all around them, aren't bothering to snap pictures. In fact, he's seen no evidence of a camera or a cell phone. After 2 hours, Duxie steers the canoe toward a sandy spot between two giant rocks on a small island, jumping out knee-deep in water and dragging the canoe partially onto the shore. "Time to take a piss break and change paddlers," he says. The two big guys step out onto the tiny beach, and everybody stretches. Duxie can't help but notice again how large and athletic these men are. A little intimidating. The bigger one is blonde and silent, with transparent gray eyes. The other one, the one with the beard, is a bit darker and seems to take the lead in communicating with Duxie. Duxie is just about to direct him to the front of the canoe to take over as the lead paddler. The bigger one is still in the woods, doing whatever he needs to do, when just behind them there's a rustling in the bushes next to the giant boulder. Duxie turns, expecting to see the big guy, and immediately recognizes Sandy. Sandy is a tail-wagging yellow lab with a distinctive red collar and a pleasing disposition. Wherever Sandy goes in the Quetico, Julie O'Connor won't be far behind. And sure enough, there is Ontario Conservation Officer Julie O'Connor, stepping sideways through a thicket and onto the narrow beach, a smile on her face. "How you doing, Duxie?" Julie is 40-ish. Her brown ponytail sticks out the back of her green baseball cap with the official provincial conservation patch on the front. She's wearing her tan, short-sleeved uniform shirt today with green vest, sidearm, and radio strapped to her waist. Sunglasses hide her eyes. "Oh, Julie," says Duxie. "Hi. Things are going pretty good. Didn't know you were here." "Yeah, well, just the other side of these rocks. You probably couldn't see my boat. Me and Sandy needed a break. Who we got here?" she says, gesturing toward Duxie's newest friend and benefactor. "Oh, he's one of my guests," Duxie says, shooting the guy a look that seemed to say, "Don't worry, I got this." "From Finland, actually," Duxie says. "Doesn't speak English too good. We're not fishing or nothing today. Just poking around and learning about canoeing." Officer O'Connor never takes her eyes off the guy. "Welcome, sir. Sorry, but gotta check your passport and permits. The man turns, leaning into the canoe, fishing around for papers, coming up with a red-covered passport labeled Europeiska Union, Suomi, Finland, Passi. Julie steps to the man's side to peer around the bottom of his enormous shoulder, reaching out to page through the document. Concentrating on it, Duxie notices the bigger guy with the empty gray eyes emerging silently from the woods, walking calmly toward Julie's back. Seems to Duxie like he's going to give Julie a friendly hug, wrapping his massive left arm around the back of her neck, then twisting slightly to the right. Duxie hearing a snap. Julie going limp. Before she hits the ground, the man bends gracefully to scoop her up in both arms and carry her into the trees. Sandy, her tail no longer wagging, follows along, the three of them disappearing from Duxie's view. He hears a bark, a whimper, and then nothing. Duxie's mouth is gaping now, his heart pounding, his breathing heavy, his brain addled. Just seconds ago, he was chatting with his longtime friend. Now something very bad has happened. Duxie isn't exactly terrified. That might come later, but he's dumbfounded. What? He hears himself saying, what? The bearded man stares calmly into Duxie's eyes for a terrible moment. Then his friend emerges from the woods, carrying Julie's radio and pointing Julie's pistol right at Duxie. The bearded man utters a few words that Duxie doesn't understand. The bigger man uncocks the gun and sticks it in his pocket. We go now, says the bearded man, stuffing the passport back in his pack, gesturing Duxie to the back of the canoe. They're off once again, heading south. Duxie's travelogue going silent, his arms shaking. They slip past the backside of Berg Island and into Sandpoint Lake. It occurs to Duxie that he might not have much time left to live, that he probably won't get to enjoy the money he's so busy earning, figuring that it adds up to maybe $5,000 US. The trip to Vancouver he was dreaming about may never happen. He wanted to see his daughter and the new baby somebody said she had several months ago. But now it's, shall we say, up in the air. Where is United States? It's the first time Duxie has heard the bigger one speak. Duxie points to the distant shore on the right, steering the canoe in that direction to the southwest. It's not altogether clear just when they pass into U.S. waters. But a half hour later, they enter King William Narrows, and then float gracefully into their destination, Crane Lake, Minnesota, a remote body of water bordered by impressive rocks and a thick layer of pines. Checking the map, the bigger man sees the lake's east bay and the point that marks their small sandy landing spot. As the canoe glides into shore, he breaks into the cooler, pulling out the extra bottle of Jim Beam and 3 paper cups. Standing now on the beach with his friend and Duxie, he pours 3 stiff drinks, expertly slipping a tiny white tablet into Duxie's cup without anyone noticing. Duxie's hand trembles as he accepts the drink. He needs it and downs it enthusiastically. Without a smile, the 3 men toast their arrival on U.S. soil. Duxie awaits his fate without a word. The end is near, he says to himself. The men are methodically grabbing their backpacks and stiffly shaking Duxie's hand before turning and heading into the woods. A blue SUV awaits them on a dirt road a quarter-mile up the slope. It will take them 4 hours to reach Minneapolis. Locating the man, codenamed Walrus, and his one remaining stooge shouldn't be a problem. Duxie is left standing on the tiny beach, expecting a bullet from the trees at any second. He thinks about the wife who left him 20 years ago for a better prospect, and a daughter he really never got to know, and a granddaughter he'll never see. But there's no sound, no bullet. When it doesn't happen, he turns to gaze out over Crane Lake. Duxie trembles. A fine summer day has turned to evening. A mist gathers at the edge of the far shore. A jetliner, very high in the sky, leaves a vapor trail as it moves off to the northeast. The lake is calm like glass. Duxie figures to make the Burnt Island campground by sunset. But of course, he won't make it. Within a half hour, Brian Edward Duck, age 68, will suffer a fatal heart attack. His body, slumped at the bottom of the big canoe, will be discovered 2 days later drifting along Rainy River.